We'll start with introductions. Is there anyone around the table of the localities that has introductions to make? Anyone from our agencies? And yes.
I'm Matt Scalia with WADA filling in for Ben Goodell, but can anybody really fill in for Ben? So thank you.
Good morning. I believe the TPO staff also has introduction.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone had a good holiday. I'd like to introduce CJ Headley. You could stand up, CJ. He's been working part-time on the LRTP team, but we're happy to have him here in person full-time. So you'll be seeing his face more and more as we continue the development of the 2050.
And then we're also going to introduce some staff for later on in the meeting.
Yeah, just as for all your awareness, agenda item 9 on the census urban area designation. We have VDOT staff joining us virtually today. I just wanted to acknowledge them before we get started. I believe Ben Manel, JJ Charles, and Ian are on the call. Ian Turner are on the call today. Just wanted to thank them for joining us remotely to give us an update on this important topic. Thank you.
If there's no other introductions, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is approval of the agenda. And unless there's any questions or comments, this is an action item.
To approve. Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any comments on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 4 is our public comment period, and we limit public comments to 3 minutes per individual present at the meeting. Is there anyone present at the meeting that would like to speak? Seeing none, item 5 is submitted public comments, and there are no submitted public comments in the package this month. Moving on to item number 6, this is comments and updates from our agencies and military liaisons. We'll start with VDOT.
Madam Chair, no updates this morning from VDOT.
I'm surprised, but we'll move on to DRPT.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick update. Last week, FTA announced awards for their buses and bus facilities and low-no discretionary programs, which are funded by IIJA. Virginia did quite well with these programs. DRPT received $4.7 million to replace 39 transit buses for 11 different rural transit providers in the Commonwealth. WMATA up in Northern Virginia received $104 million to convert its maintenance hub in Nova to accommodate full battery electric fleet. Alexandria's transit system received $24 million for electric buses, as well as utility upgrades to accommodate a full electric fleet. Loudoun County received $14 million for CNG buses. And last but certainly not least, HRT received $25 million to replace its Parks Ave facility in Virginia Beach. So we were quite pleased with the results of those awards and looking forward to moving those projects forward.
That's certainly good news. Is anyone from Federal Highways here today? The port?
Good morning, Madam Chair. There's no update this morning. Thank you.
And are any of our military partners here? Not seeing anyone, we'll move on to approval of our consent agenda, and this is also an action item. Were there any questions on our consent agenda?
Move approval.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any comments on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving right along, item number 8 is a presentation by VDOT for the 6-year plan.
Good morning, everyone. I figured I'd save my comments for this presentation since you have to hear me anyway. All right, hope everybody had a good July 4th. So starting on July 5th, I figured I'd bring up a really good topic to talk about VDOT's 6-year improvement program. I was asked to come present to you all today. Our Commonwealth Transportation Board approved our FY 24 to 29 6-year improvement program at their June 21st meeting. So I thought today I'd go over some highlights and answer any questions that you may have. Right, so this slide here shows the change from our draft program that was presented at our public hearing that we had here in Hampton Roads at on April 20th. And as you can see right here, there was a slight increase from the draft program to the final proposed. Actually proposed now, it's actual final was approved. So we have $25.9 billion that was approved for the 24 to 29 program. And as you see here, 19.6 billion was for construction. So that was about a $300 million increase from what was presented at the draft. You'll see that there's 4,700 projects that were approved as part of this 6-year plan approval. So exciting. I know there's a lot of those projects here in Hampton Roads. And you'll see we had 809 million in debt service, and we have 3 billion that was provided by others that's in the current 6-year plan. And of course, that includes HRTPO funding as well. So just a couple highlights of the program. So for the revenue sharing program, we continue to have flexibility with what was granted by the Commonwealth Transportation Board during COVID. So starting in FY 25 through 29, we'll have $100 million that will be allocated annually under the revenue sharing program. Since COVID up through FY 24, we've had a lot of flexibility on how money is allocated. It's actually allocated based on your schedules and your estimates. So in one fiscal year, it could be higher. The next, it could be lower. It equals the same at the end of the day, but we've been given some flexibility through FY 24 for the revenue sharing and how we allocate. You'll see here we have Innovation and Technology Transportation Funds, what we call ITTF funding. We have $25 million that is pulled from the High Priority Projects Program. And Hampton Roads, we always seem to do pretty well with this fund type. This helps for pilot project type, innovative type project efforts. And here in Hampton Roads, we have a lot of those ongoing. So we're pretty successful here on those. The next item is our unpaved roads program. There's 25 million annually that's allocated to this program. We still do have counties in Hampton Roads that have roadways, that unpaved roads that actually qualify for funding under this program. And then, of course, we did allocate the Smart Scale Round 5 consensus scenario that is approved, and all those projects that were selected are now in our 6-year plan, ready to move forward. And then I did want to mention, I know we talked about this before, the inflationary cost increases on existing projects. Those were also included in the final program. So I know there were a lot of locally and VDOT administered projects that received funding due to inflationary cost increases. And then finally, for the Federal Highway Infrastructure Program earmarks, we incorporated in the final program about a dozen or so earmarks that were allocated through VDOT. With localities applying, of course. I did want to mention here for a second that there's a lot of grants under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA, where the localities are direct recipients. Those projects, VDOT will still offer support and oversight based on our availability. But I did want to point out that that funding cannot come directly to VDOT. So if you did receive a direct grant, that funding has to go to the locality, and we would work with you on oversight costs and doing that separately. But I just wanted to point that out. And I do want to remind folks that if you're applying for IIJA, if you could just let our team know what you're applying for, and then if you receive the grant, even if you're a direct recipient, if you can let us know, and then let us know if you need assistance with oversight as well. The sooner we know, the more that we can prepare ourselves to be able to assist. So some of the key changes from the draft program to the final. We did conduct in-person spring public hearings, 9 of them across the state. Of course, ours was here in Hampton Roads on April 20th. We incorporated a small uplift in 5 formula programs, and that was due to the fuel reserve that we released some of those fundings that we had held back in that reserve. So we released those, and then we had some debt service adjustments. So there were the 5 formula programs were state of good repair, high priority, and district grant. Those two, which are fund smart scale, and then interstate and safety. So there was a slight uptick to funding there. The next bullet you see is we converted 12.3 million of highway safety improvement funds to vulnerable road user funds on existing bike ped safety projects. This is a federal requirement that if when 15% of the state's highway deaths are pedestrians, we have to divert money, that percentage of money to the VRU program. We do have projects that qualified under that program that were already existing. So what we did is kind of swap the funding type. So it was more of an administrative change to meet that requirement. And that's reflected in the final program. Some of the highlights of the major programs. And in this slide, you see we have the revised approved FY23 to 28 6-year plan, and then we compare that to what was presented for the 24 to 29 draft, and then the final, which shown here is proposed, but is actually final 6-year plan numbers. So as you see, state of good repair, that stayed pretty even from the draft. I did want to point out that we had 28 applications through the State of Good Repair local paving program. All 28 applications were funded for Hampton Roads, worth about $13.9 million for FY24. And as a reminder to the group, we did receive an exception for the federal process for the FY24 projects. So we're pleased that we're able to develop those as state-funded projects. Again, that's only State of Good Repair, local paving, FY24 projects. The next thing I wanted to point out is the Virginia Highway Safety Improvement Program. We did open that back up to localities to apply. We had 14 applications submitted. 12 of those 14 applications were funded, equating to about $25.6 million for FY24. So again, we're excited to see that. I did want to point out that, for the FY24 projects, for safety and of course, State of Good Repair paving, we want to try to see those get developed and through the process as quick as possible. So we'll be working with your staff and trying to see how quickly we can get those projects through the program. You'll see CMAC and RSTP here. I know John Mahaley had presented that program at a recent TTAC meeting, so I won't belabor that. Okay, so this slide here, this is just some more major programs I wanted to highlight. I mentioned the district grant program, DGP, and high priority project program, HPP. Those are the two funding sources that make up the smart scale allocations. So those combined together make up what we fund smart scale projects with. So you'll see from the revised last year program to this year's, there was a slight increase for both of those programs. Also, you'll see interstate operations and enhancement program, IOEP. We did receive quite a bit of funding in previous years for projects here in Hampton Roads, one of them being the I-464 flyover ramp that's currently under design right now. For revenue sharing and TAP, you see the allocations available for both those programs. We did, as you're aware, the pre-applications for the current revenue sharing and TAP programs. Those closed on Friday of last week. For revenue sharing, we received 51 projects that were submitted for pre-app. And for transportation alternatives, we received 40 new projects for consideration. And I'll show the schedule here in a minute about when the full applications are due. This slide here is the Smart Scale Round 5. Shows the final program on what was approved last month. And as you see, for Hampton Roads, we had 27 projects approved for funding worth $183.2 million. So we did pretty well. So we're excited to see that. This, again, is an exercise on the eyes. I put this list in here for you since you'll have this as a handout later. These are all 54 projects that were applied for under Round 5 Smart Scale in ranked order based on their smart scale score. The ones that are highlighted are those 27 projects that were approved for funding. So I just thought I'd include that in here for you all to see. And this is the remainder of the 54 projects that were not funded. I included this slide here. This just shows the type of projects that were applied for under the program, this cycle. So you see that a majority of the projects were highway type projects, 34. You'll see the next highest was the bike and pedestrian projects. We had 19, and then we had one bus transit project that was applied for. And then as you go to the right of the list, you'll see which ones were funded. So you had 34 for highway that were applied for, 14 were funded. 12 of the 19 bike and pedestrian projects were funded, and then the one bus transit project was funded. You see the average smart scale dollar amount, about 16.8 million. And then the average total, so that includes local funds and other funding, was about 7.5 million. I know this is exciting stuff, so they added music to it. It's great. I thought I'd include this slide in here. This is the urban maintenance payments for those cities and towns that maintain your own systems. You receive maintenance payments quarterly from VDOT. The payment rates are adjusted each fiscal year. So for FY24, the new rates are shown there on the slide for principal and minor arterials, and then for collector and local streets. The total budget statewide for the FY24 urban maintenance program is $510 million. I have to point out that here in Hampton Roads, we have 13 cities and towns that actually receive money through this program. And it equates about $250 million. So almost half of the state urban maintenance payments comes here to our region. A couple other bullets down. We also distribute, along with the maintenance payments, Chesapeake gets an additional $1 million annually, since they're the only locality that maintains movable structures. So the CTV allocated additional money. For the overweight permit fee, we receive funding from DMV for those vehicles that are overweight, and we distribute those funds based on lane mileage. And then finally, the last bullet there, the Virginia Port Authority tax exemption. Those localities that are listed there receive funding, $1 million total, divvied up to each of those localities for tax exempt real estate that the port owns to compensate those localities. As promised, here's some other items of interest. Here's the revenue sharing and TAP schedule. Of course, the pre-applications closed, as I mentioned, on Friday last week. The full applications open August 15th and close October 2nd for both programs. And it closes October 2nd at 5 p.m. So we're looking at the pre-applications now, and our team will be getting back with each locality with any comments or any revisions or any necessary changes that we see. But I just want to make you aware of those deadlines. Also, the statewide local programs workshop that's held annually by Central Office Local Assistance Division will be hosted here in Virginia Beach this year. It's going to be September 12th through 14th. Registration is opened on our website, and I'll provide a link to it in the handouts. The next thing I have on the list is the Urban Quarterly Forum. Sonia and her team started this. I think this will be the second one, correct, Sonia? So it'll be held August 10th, and the topics include scoping and construction pitfalls. More information will come out for that. And then finally, if you wanted to go back and look at some additional numbers and presentations on our 6-year plan, I included a bunch of different links here to take a look not only at the 6-year plan, but also Smart Scale. If you're curious of how the project scored and what categories, the detailed scorecards, there's a link to those, and the project scores are also linked for your review. That's all I have, unless there's any questions.
Were there any questions or comments?
I've got one. Todd, is the online 6-year website, has that been updated?
I received the email this morning that it was updated as of this morning. So yes, it should be. If you're seeing anything that doesn't look quite right, let us know. We saw a few glitches last week, but we believe that was all corrected for what was uploaded this morning. Sir.
And Todd or Sonia, do you know, will the LAP certification program be offered at the LAP conference, or do you know when that program will be offered again for people that have new staff?
There will be a boot camp track at the local programs workshop, but I don't know if there will be the certification training will be there. We'll circle back with central office and send that to you.
Were there any other questions or comments? Thank you. I believe DRPT is going to continue the presentation on the 6-year program.
Right. Good morning, everyone. Some more exciting stuff for you guys this morning. A couple weeks ago, the CTB also approved DRPT's 6-year improvement program, so I'm providing a few highlights. So first, this is a 5-year comparison and a look back of DRPT's last 5 SIPs. So as you can see, we've had some steady growth with the exception of our FY21 SIP, where obviously some COVID impacts there. The CTB only approved 2 of the 6 years of our SIP in 21. So that's why that one is an outlier, but otherwise we've seen some steady growth within our programs. Highlighting real quick the drop in it's the light blue in FY23 to FY24. That is a decrease in our rail program. And that was due to some changes, I believe, made by the General Assembly to make some changes in the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative. So quickly, just to run down the transit program, the 24 SIP includes almost $5 billion for public transportation projects. The top 2 here on the chart are our 2 primary funding programs for public transportation. That's transit operating and transit capital. These 2 programs support the ongoing operating, maintenance, and capital needs of our 39 transit agencies in Virginia. We also have VRE, which was a new add to the program this year. The General Assembly this past session included a new carve-out for the Virginia Railway Express. So that goes into effect next year. So that $85 million that you see on the table, it's for 5 years in the 6-year program beginning next year. WMATA is the next one. They take the lion's share of our 6-year program. And then transit other, that includes a handful of smaller transit funding programs, such as the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. We have a demo program, workforce development, and technical assistance program. So real quick, just some highlights on the capital program. We received for FY24 a total of $135 million in state capital funding requests across 435 individual projects. We have to prioritize all of these projects based on CTB policy. And so the graphic on the left here, you can see what was funded versus what was not funded. The colored bars represent what was funded in those 3 capital buckets that we drop each of our projects into. The top one is state of good repair. The second, the red one, is minor enhancement. And then the smallest one down at the bottom is major expansion. This is the typical distribution of our capital program. State code and CTB policy requires that the vast majority of our funding for capital goes to state of good repair projects. So those are mostly bus replacements. And then highlighting specifically what's coming to this region through the capital program, HRT secured almost $16 million worth of capital funding, and then Suffolk is receiving $157,000. Then shifting over to our other transit programs, again, operating supports ongoing operating and maintenance within our transit agencies. We had over $133 million in operating assistance that was allocated for FY24. HRT is getting just under $27 million, WADA $2.2 million, and Suffolk Transit $485,000. The Transit Ridership Incentive Program, we had roughly $27 million to allocate this year. HRT is getting almost $3 million of that for new on-demand microtransit service in the Newport News and Virginia Beach regions. Our technical assistance program, we had $2.4 million to allocate, and the HRT traffics program is getting $25,000 of that for a commuter assistance program strategic plan, which is a state requirement. And then last but not least, workforce development program. We had over $400,000 to allocate this year, and HRT secured $16,000 for a transit intern. So shifting over to our rail program, these are the different funding categories that our rail program oversees. The freight program is our newest program, which funds capacity improvements for freight railroads. Rail planning is mostly managed by internally by DRPT for planning projects on the rail side. We also have our rail preservation program, which is an ongoing program that we've had for a number of years. And then transforming rail is the big one that is managed by the Virginia Passenger Railway Authority. And this is the last slide, which just summarizes those two primary programs that DRPT manages. Again, this doesn't include any of the transforming rail in Virginia projects or the planning projects. This is just for the freight and rail preservation programs. So you can see these rail projects occur throughout the state, but a lot of them are happening in this region. Some of these were, I believe, approved in a previous SIP. So our rail team, until the funding has been fully allocated for multi-year projects, you will continue to see them on this chart, or this map rather. But all in all, good news for this region as it relates to rail. And I believe that is the last slide. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Thank you. If there's no questions or comments following up on all of that, and I'm assuming that the presentations will be available after this online with the agenda packages, if anyone wants to follow up, since I know it's a lot of numbers. We'll move on to item number 9, which is the 2020 Census Urban Area Designation, which is a presentation from VDOT staff online and going to present remote. Yeah.
Do you have the presentation up or you want to share it?
Yeah, you can go ahead and share the presentation from your end. We have a backup just in case things don't work, so.
So first, these are just topics we want to cover. We just want to keep it short. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, or if you have any questions back. We just want to go over what urban smoothing is, why we do it, what's changed, why that matters to you. So basically, urban smoothing is the process where the census gives us urban areas that they define as urban using an algorithm. We need to go in and change those areas so that it better reflects planning purposes. We do this at the census block level. And so we use the previous boundaries that we did 10 years ago, as well as the new census defined boundaries as our starting point. So here's
an example of an area that we smoothed, in that light green on the map. That is not defined as urban by the census, but we have smoothed it to cover that area. The intention is to capture new developments, large traffic generators like shopping centers, airports, schools, that sort of a thing, industrial areas, as well as getting main highways, right? And we do this. We do this really for a couple reasons: for smoother functional classification, as well as a couple other that we'll see later. So, what's important to you? There's been 5 urban areas in the HRTPO that have been smoothed. You'll notice that some of them are kind of strange. If you go and look at them later, I'll give you a link. Those are Virginia Beach, Williamsburg, Smithfield, Suffolk, which is new. It used to be part of the Virginia Beach urban area, and now Franklin, which has a special case. Williamsburg and Smithfield are totally fine, but because of the split off that Suffolk had from Virginia Beach, we need to make some decisions based on like where to put the boundary, right? And the other thing that I want to make sure that you're all aware of and that we mention is that Franklin is currently split in half by the HRTPO boundary. And so not sure what the implications of this are yet, but we need to set up some sort of meeting between the HRTPO, the VDOT Hampton Roads District, and the FHWA so that we can all get on the same page about it. So here's an example. In 2010, these are the census defined. So the boundaries have changed a little bit. So you can see that in this blue in 2010, this all was Virginia Beach, and the city of Suffolk, like the downtown area and surrounding area, was connected to it. And now, because of some new criteria that the census has, Suffolk has been separated away, which means we need to make it its own separate smoothed area. And here you can see that Franklin split in half. Then here's how we smoothed it last time. So basically we just use the county boundaries, as the smooth boundary. And we didn't do that for every single one. Virginia Beach was a special case. And this year we're going back and forth. Right now, this is what our current proposed boundary is. But this is under review and doesn't need to be finished until October. But we're going to need your feedback as well as the districts and the localities' feedback before that, so we can get it done by then. Basically, what's most important is that we need to find a dividing line between the Virginia Beach area and the Suffolk area. So this is what matters to you. As far as what the law says about containing the entirety of urban areas, it seems to be right now is that the MPO boundary has to encompass the entire smoothed area. But again, that's going to need to be a discussion that we have later on. We do this for clear functional classification designation. So when a road crosses over a boundary, is census defined or smoothed, we try and make it so it's all in one. Right? So it's not weaving in, and just so it's easier for everyone to use. And then we submit this to the Highway Performance Monitoring System. When we submit our annual classification of roads, we also submit these smooth boundaries, so that's why we need to have it done in a reasonable time. This is used to designate urban rural freight corridors. We use this as a general guideline for curb and gutter and interchange access control and how we pave and all that sort of fun stuff. And importantly, these are not hard boundaries. So just because an area or a neighborhood or a road is not considered urban as to its census block, like its census block is not urban, that doesn't mean that you can't use curb and gutter instead of ditch, right? So those are kind of why this is important. So we have a wonderful map online that you can get to at that URL that will show you census defined areas from 2010 and 2020, the smoothed areas from 2010 and our proposed ones in 2020, and a couple other layers that you can use to compare the two, or yeah, to compare the previous to the new one. Um, the smoothed boundary does not affect your funding. You won't get any more money just because your area is bigger. You won't lose money because it's smaller. It's not going to affect anything in that way, because that's all going to be based on your census designated area. The same goes for population. So if you have something that's like your funding is based on population, it won't matter that your smooth area is bigger. So making your smooth area bigger just to get more people in it isn't going to get you right. Then there is some implication with federal aid eligibility for like minor collectors in urban areas. So those sorts of things, we use the smooth urban areas. So you're going to need to talk to your districts. You can talk to TMPD, and you can talk to the localities to learn more about that. We don't have perfect answers for you yet, but that's kind of where we're at. And then the timeline, as I said, we're trying to get the FHWA approval by the end of October, and submit it by September, which means that we really need to be agreed to have everything agreed upon by mid-August, if possible. So it's not going to be a giant effort, but we do need your input, and we would like to have you guys involved in this process. And then finally, if you need to contact us here at TMPD, these are our emails. You feel more than happy to send us an email if you have any questions. And then feel free to also CC your district or district people, district leadership, whoever else might benefit from it. That's all I have if anyone has any questions.
Just to clarify, have you met with the individual localities already? Is that something that's upcoming in the process, or where does that fall?
We have met with individual localities ourselves. Instead, what we've decided to do is meet with the districts and MPOs individually, and send it to them to talk to their districts or to their localities if they are interested in doing that, or if they notice that an area is like in need, like has some strange situation. So we have not reached out to each individual one.
And this is Dale. Jamie, we have, so TPO staff is taking that on. We've met with the city of Suffolk already because we see the biggest implication so far being with Suffolk. And then staff is continuing to review the rest of the region. And we really don't see any other concerning changes across the region. There are some changes in Isle of Wight, so we'll be meeting with your staff just to show some of the changes we're suggesting there. But we want to try to get all of our input, and we'll also present this at an upcoming LRTP subcommittee just to show you what we're suggesting. Ian, thanks for providing a link to the map. Kyle's also got some maps that he can share if you know any locality wants to sit and talk to us in a little more detail.
So is this? Go ahead. So is this something that you'd be looking for action from the TPO at some point in the process?
Not necessarily anything big. If the boundary needs to change, if that ends up being a situation that is, then yeah, there would need to be action from the TPO at some point on the line. It's mainly just an input. If you guys can come to an agreement or just a general consensus and just let us know. We don't need anything like super official or super like a statement or anything. We just like as many people as they can, or whoever you guys decide, to just kind of go over it and give us some feedback.
And Pavithra probably is going to approach whether we have like an official TPO action. But before that, I've got some questions for you, Ian. In terms of the Smithfield urban area, if we choose to add some census blocks that then makes the Smithfield area connect with the Virginia Beach, is that fine? Is there any issue?
Yes, that's okay. Oh, that's perfectly fine. The same thing happened in Williamsburg, and they stay separate and they border each other, but it's totally okay.
And then we'll definitely want to follow back up with you and the rest of staff about Franklin and the boundary. Our understanding was since Franklin wasn't contiguous with the Virginia Beach or Suffolk area, that the way our MPO boundary was fine as is, but we'll certainly want to circle back and we'll need to talk with Franklin staff as well.
Yeah.
You had said that the funding does not change. Are you talking specifically about maintenance? Because our impression was that the funding, like the flavor of the funding is what we had heard, could change based on whether an area was urban or rural.
And can you take that one for me?
Sure. Good morning, Daniel. This is Ben. Our discussions with investment and infrastructure investment division, Kim Pryor and Jason Robinson, have indicated that for all intents and purposes, there may be some changes of the flavor of funding, but what happens will be almost imperceptible to localities and NPOs. A lot of it is formula driven, and that their direction was they don't see any significant changes occurring here.
Thanks, Ben.
So in terms of the
Ben.
timeline, TPO board meetings on July 20th, I don't know if TTAC has, just based on the timeline. So it might be that we will be working with the localities. As we said, we've met with Suffolk and we'll have to figure out Franklin and also Isle of Wight. So we might not have a specific action per se, just because of the timeline, they need feedback. But what we can do is once we kind of work with the localities and we, as Dale said, at the next LRTP subcommittee, but we can also send an email to TTAC to let them know this is kind of where we've landed based on feedback from the localities. So again, a plug to please, I'm guilty of doing that. Please don't ignore the email. So check, please make sure if you see the link, you notice some things are not right, please let us know as soon as possible, because we would like to get this wrapped up. End of the month, beginning of August would be a good time to wrap up.
August regular meetings. We canceled. Any other questions or comments?
Just thanks again, Ben, JJ, Charles, and Ian for providing this. Again, we'll work with our localities so that you're just getting really one draft change from our region and not being peppered with, 15, 16 different suggestions. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
There's no other questions or comments. We'll move on to item number 10, which is a presentation on Title VI compliance review.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Quan McLaurin, and I am our DEI and Title VI/Civil Rights Liaison here for the HRTPO and for the HRPDC. Some of you may have been present at our last TPO board meeting where we talked about Title VI compliance and our most recent review. So for those of you who were there, I want to give you that additional context. And for those of you who may not be as familiar, I want to make sure that you are also in the loop and aware of where we are in that process. So just to give you some brief background on Title VI, basically any entity, agency, organization that receives federal funding is subject to Title VI. And what Title VI says is that we have to be non-discriminatory in nature and how we follow out or how we do our programs and operations. Since TPO and PDC receive federal funds and many of our subrecipients do, we also need to make sure that our subrecipients are also in compliance. There are a couple of governing structures that are related to this area, such as environmental justice, limited English proficiency, ADA, and then some other compliance requirements. Some of you may be wondering, what does that structure look like? Who actually does that review for us? That would actually be the Federal Highway Administration and VDOT. They conduct those compliance reviews for our organization. And that is because that is where we receive the bulk of our federal funding. So where are we now? We received our review on February 14th. We responded on March 19th. We submitted an extension request on May 15th. And actually today, we are hoping to receive input back from VDOT Civil Rights Division on our draft Title VI plan and LEP plan. So what was in that compliance review? Um, under Title VI administration, hire a Title VI administrator. I am here, so we don't have to worry about that. And then create a Title VI plan for both the PDC and update the one for the TPO that is currently under review and with the VDOT Civil Rights Division. Title VI complaint process that has already been updated. It is on the TPO and on the PDC website. And in the updated Title VI plan, it has been reviewed by VDOT Civil Rights Division, and there were no adjustments that needed to be made. Title VI training, we are currently in the process of working with VDOT and Federal Highway Administration to provide some Title VI training for our staff and for board and commissioner members. For limited English proficiency, we have procured translation services and they are in place here for the organization. And then we also have our LEP plan currently being reviewed. For public involvement, the TPO and the PDC public participation plans are currently being reviewed by the VDOT Civil Rights Division. We are continuing to work on improving our staffing policies. And our assurances are also completed and have been submitted to VDOT Civil Rights Division for review. We are continuing to work closer with the HRPDC, and then we will be submitting a goals and accomplishments report for Title VI at the end of the federal fiscal year. This approach that we're moving toward is going to be more of a collaborative approach between the PDC and the TPO on Title VI, limited English proficiency, and on our public participation practices. This will reduce internal and external confusion, improve efficacy, and then make it easier for us to update later on down the road. So let me see if I can. Okay, here we go. So these are the areas that we've already completed. We have a Title VI administrator, we have our assurances complete, and we have our updated assurances that have been sent. We have translation services that have been procured. And so our next step is at the July board meeting. That is when the Title VI plan will be made available for review, for public comment. And then we would like to get comments back by September 3rd. That is when the public comment period will end. And then in October, the board and the commission will be asked to review it for adoption for the organization. You'll also see that in November, we're looking to have our goals and accomplishment report submitted. And then staffing and training is an ongoing process. Thank you. Are there any questions that we have at this time?
Just to clarify, the
Mhm.
Title VI plan on the day of the board meeting is when it's going out for public comment, correct?
Yeah, a link will be sent with the agenda packet.
Okay, so this is a request to all of you. We get reviewed every 4 years by the feds, but we also go through a VDOT Title VI specific audit on Title VI and compliance. So please review the Title VI document. If you think of any other ways we should, add some input, please let us know because this is something that is needed so our funding doesn't get affected. So a big plug-in, please review that, the document when it's out for public review on July 18th.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pavitra.
Thank you. Were there any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 11 is a presentation on regional performance measures.
Morning, everybody.
Today, I'll be making a brief presentation on our annual system performance report that we do as part of our regional performance measures and targets effort here at the TPO. We've been doing this now for, I guess, 5 years, 6 years now. But MPOs must, on an annual basis, prepare and use a set of federally established performance measures. And as part of that, we also need to monitor the progress on how we're achieving those performance measures and then incorporate all this information into both the LRTP and the TIP. So go back to, it should actually say February, not January, but if you go back to February of this year, the TTAC had recommended approval for updated targets, both in the annual targets in the safety and transit areas, as well as all the 4-year targets you see here in the pavement condition, bridge condition, roadway performance, and freight areas. So in terms of today, I just wanted to talk about the system performance report that we put together every year based on these regional performance measures and targets. So in terms of what we include in the report, it's a description of the methodology used for all the measures that I showed you on the previous slide. We also go over the historical data, so showing what the trends have been over the last generally 10 years for each of these areas. The state also needs to set targets, so we include information on how the state came about choosing their targets in each of those areas. Then talking about how the HRTPO set our targets, whether we decide to match the state or whether we had a reason for going our own way in terms of setting a target. And then ultimately, what is the progress being made toward the targets? Are we achieving or surpassing our targets? Are we missing our targets? And if so, why? So most of what I'll go over briefly here today is the progress toward the targets in some of these areas. So I decided to start with the bad news, unfortunately. So we'll start with safety, which is, as you've heard me speak many times, and also I'm sure you've seen in the press, when you look at the fatalities, serious injuries in our region, they've gone way up since the start of the pandemic. So when you're talking about achieving our targets, we're not close in some of our areas. So starting with number of fatalities, the most recent data we have, 2021, you see we had the big increase up to 176 fatalities in our region. Our target had been 123, so needless to say, we missed the target by a lot on fatalities, unfortunately. And we also need to set a target in fatality rate, so it's the number of fatalities divided by 100 million vehicle miles of travel, so no surprise. We weren't close on achieving that target either in the year 2021. Serious injuries is the same story. We did see an increase. Not quite as bad as you saw in fatalities, but we have seen an increase in serious injuries in recent years. So when you look at the target we set, which I do want to remind this group, we generally set Vision Zero targets when it comes to safety. So we try to decrease by a set amount each year until you get out to the LRTP horizon. So with these increases, we're missing the targets on serious injuries as well. And in addition, in the serious injury rate, not close on those targets. The other safety target we need to set is for active transportation. So it's fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized transportation users. Same thing, we are seeing an increase in that. So based on where we had set the target of 175 for the year 2021, we're missing that one as well. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go too deep into the transit targets because there are quite a number of measures we need to set them for, both in transit asset management and transit safety. So I just want to mention it's a mixed bag. Many of our rolling stock targets, we are surpassing the target, but we're not in terms of the condition of buses, which obviously is a big deal in our region. Also, some of our equipment vehicles and infrastructure are missing the target when you look at transit asset management as well. Transit safety, once again, we need to set so many targets in different areas. I don't want to go into too much detail, but it is a mixed bag as we saw on the other transit asset management category. So we are surpassing targets in some of the areas and missing in others. One other area where we are missing our targets is bridge condition. So if you look at the left, this is National Highway System bridge deck area in good condition. And then on the right, it's the same measure, but it's in poor condition. So we had set a target for greater than 27% of our bridge deck area on the NHS in good condition. Unfortunately, we have seen that decrease a little bit in the last couple of years, so we're missing the target on that. When you look at poor condition, you see that big jump in the year 2020. As far as I can tell, based on the data, that's the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. So it's such a big part when you look at the National Highway System bridge deck area in our region. So one bridge, if it's the HRBT falling into poor condition, you see that big jump. So based on our target of 3%, we are currently missing that. But with the HRBT project underway, we hope by the year 2025 that number will come way back down. Finally, do have some good news. The rest of the slides are mostly good in terms of achieving targets. First up is pavement condition. So first thing we look at is the interstate system, both in good condition on the left, poor condition on the right. We had set a target for greater than 45% of our interstates in good condition. And being at 51%, we do easily surpass that target. Also, when you look at poor condition, we had less than 3% in poor condition as our target. We're actually down to 0.4% as of the year 2021. So our interstate system is definitely in much better condition than it was if you look back 5-10 years ago. For those of you that are here and remember some of the issues we had with 64 and 264, it's come way down and been greatly improved. So we are surpassing the target for interstate in poor condition. We also need to look at the non-interstate national highway system. So in terms of good condition on the left and poor condition on the right, when you look at the left, we've actually seen decrease in that in good condition. So we had originally set the target for 2021 at greater than 25%. We don't come close to making that target. When we set our new 4-year targets for the year 2025, based on discussions with the state as well as our working group that we set for this, we decided 25% was way too ambitious when we had set that originally. So our new target has actually been set to keep the same condition that we saw in 2021 at 14%. You look at poor condition, though, we are doing pretty well. We saw a big decrease from 2020 to 2021 down to 2.1% in poor condition. So that does surpass our target of 5% that we had set for the year 2021. Other good news, when you look at roadway performance, these look at the reliability, travel time reliability of our system. So the one on the left is interstate, the one on the right is non-interstate national highway system. Surprisingly, when you have a pandemic, it's really great in terms of making your travel time reliability targets. So way back before the pandemic, we had set greater than 82% for reliability on our system. And so higher is better. The closer you get to 100% is as reliable a system as you can get. So when you look at the pandemic, we were up at 96%, and even 2021, it's still 90%. So we do easily achieve targets on that. Same for the national highway system, non-interstate. We're well above the target we had set pre-pandemic for those numbers. Finally, the last one I want to go over is freight. This is also a reliability measure. It's the opposite, though. The lower the number, the better. You want to be as close to 1 as possible. That's a completely reliable system for freight movement. So same thing here with the pandemic. We saw obviously a big improvement in terms of the reliability of freight movement in our region. And so we easily surpassed the target on that. Just to give a quick summary on where we're doing good, where we're doing bad. On the left, in terms of surpassing targets, anything related to roadway performance or freight movement, obviously with the impacts of the pandemic. And as we move forward, hopefully we'll continue to meet those reliability targets. Also, pavement condition is getting better in our region, so we're meeting those targets, and then select transit targets. Where we're doing poorly, anything related to safety, unfortunately, is not going well. The bridge condition targets that I showed you, but as I mentioned, I think the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project will greatly help us in terms of achieving the long-term targets we have there. The pavement issue on non-interstate NHS, I do want to mention that in our region, a lot of that is city maintained, so there is an issue, I would say, between VDOT pavement condition on the interstate system, and then you start looking at non-interstate NHS where it's more city controlled, and we are seeing some of the difference there. And then obviously missing on some of the transit asset management and transit safety targets, which hopefully some of this additional funding we're seeing in the IJA and other funding sources will help improve some of those targets we see there. So with that, the draft version of the system performance report was included with the agenda today. It's open from public review from today through July 21st, and then we'll be back here at our next meeting in September asking for final approval of the document. So with that, I know that's a lot, but I'll be happy to open it up if there's any questions on the report.
Thank you. Any questions? No questions?
Great, thank you.
Our final presentation of the day is on improving passenger rail service.
Good morning. I'm going to try to give you a new twist on on passenger rail today, both the analysis and the operation of it. So our current service, as you may be aware, we have 5 daily trains. On the map there, you can see our stations, Norfolk, Newport News, and Williamsburg. And so you have 3 South Side trains a day and 2 Peninsula trains per day. So you might have heard of recent increases in ridership, and that's true, but still less than 1% of trips to and from Hampton Roads are made by rail. And we think one reason for this is the travel times, and that's what the chart on the right is showing you, that the train times in blue are longer than the auto times in red. And so the purpose of our analysis was to improve rail service, first by identifying travel time delays and trying to take care of those, and then by identifying projects that might improve those delays or other operational facets. So we're sort of excited about it because it's the first time we've used this Amtrak data. Each train all over the country emits its location about every 3 minutes. The map on the right is a third-party representation of that. You can look at that any time of day, and I recommend if you're riding the train that you use it sort of like an arrival time type thing, like you would for the bus or for an airplane. And so we got the data, which is shown in the box there. It's really very simple. The train number, the date, the time stamp, and then a lat long. So that's it. That's where it is. And then from that, from minute to minute, calculating travel time and spot speed. We call those pings. Each time it transmits its location. So we got a year's worth of that data and processed it, try to find delays. So the first step was to look at what I'm calling Eastern Virginia segments. In other words, from Richmond's Staples Mill Station all the way down to either Newport News or Norfolk, depending on which side. And then we looked in detail. We found delays between the 2 Richmond stations, so we looked in detail at that segment. So here's the Peninsula trains southbound, the results of that data. This is travel time, so from 0 to 10 minutes on the y-axis, and then from Staples Mill Station down to Newport News on the x-axis every mile. And so what you can see is, and what I've done is I've colored, if it's above a minute a mile or an average of 60 miles an hour, then I've colored it orange. And so you can see the delays there. And speaking of that, I don't generally, well, you'll see later some speed data, but mostly it's travel time data because the train's speeds change and they stop. And so it's good to look at travel time. You can see on the left side, significant delays between the Staples Mill Station and Richmond Main Street Station. So it's taking you about 3 minutes a mile or about 24 minutes to cover that 8-mile segment. Then if you look over to the right, you can see a couple of slowdowns here and there. And then, of course, at Williamsburg, you've got to stop. So that's going to take time. And you can see that. And then same thing at Newport News. But for example, approaching the Newport News station, really no problems. That thing sort of zips in there and then stops. Okay, so northbound, similar story. You see the delay for the stop at Williamsburg, and then a couple of things along the way, but nothing really, worth saving a half a minute for. And then you get coming into Main Street Station, you do start to have some delays in the Fulton Yard area and that kind of thing. And then the delay I mentioned before, it's not quite as bad. It's more like 2.5 minutes per mile between the two stations. And we think, by the way, that that's a little bit in the weeds, but the southbound trains are coming all the way from Boston or New York. So by the time they get to Richmond, they could be out of their windows and conflict more with freight trains. Whereas the northbound trains are starting in Newport News, and so they don't miss their windows as much. All right, so now south side. So on the left, hard to read, but you're at Staples Mills station on the left, and you're at Norfolk on the far right. And you do have some delays there in Richmond as you're coming across to what they call the FA crossover. And then, of course, you're going to have delays at Petersburg because it stops there. But then if you look to the right of Petersburg, you see some more delays. And that is, we think, due to this 120-degree turn that the train takes when it's starts to head towards Norfolk. Then you see a little bit of delay in Suffolk, but not, like I say, not worth spending a lot of money to save half a minute. And but then when you get into Chesapeake at Canal Drive, near Canal Drive, you have some significant delays coming into the Norfolk station. Okay, similar northbound. This is last of the 4 slides like this. You see the delays between Canal Drive and Norfolk Station now over on the left side. And then you see the 120-degree turn. It looks pretty similar. You see the Petersburg delay for the stop, and then some delays coming into Staples Mill. So for step 2, we thought, well, we should look at these delays between the Richmond stations because really both trains, Southside and Peninsular, are using this segment. The Norfolk trains only use half of this segment, but the Peninsula trains use the whole segment. And so we looked at detail at this 8 miles. So what did we find? Well, not to go into too much detail, but we found that, in fact, the trains are moving mostly from 10 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour along this segment. It's pretty slow, and there are different reasons for that. But some geometric and that kind of thing, some conflicts with freight trains. We did find a fair number of stops, by the way. So I think particularly in the southbound, because they're missing their windows, I think 11% of the trains come to a full stop along in between there, come to at least one full stop. And so we think that this is why in the DC to they call it DC to RVA. You may remember this from 2019 EIS for higher speed rail service between DC and Richmond. And in that, and I'll try to use the little pointer here. The blow up. There's a red line. As if you look in the legend here, you'll see proposed track in red. It's hard to see on this drawing, but there is a red line between Main Street and Staples Mill. And I'm assuming that was proposed to improve some of these travel times. But we don't think that this is going to happen because if you look over on the right, let's see here. Yes, you can see this, what they call the Shaco Hill African Burying Ground, and right there along the track. And this is a place where slaves were buried back in the 19th century. Well, and before that, I would assume. And so the VPRA, the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, has determined not to disturb this area. And so we don't think that this additional track will be built. And therefore, that the travel times between the stations will improve much. So what about future plans then? Well, the state has just released a state rail plan, and it calls for 3 more trains for the south side, but the year is unspecified. So I'm not holding my breath on those trains. The Peninsula train looks more certain, 2026, which will be here before we know it. 1 additional train on the south side. So that would give us 3 on the Peninsula and 3 on the south side. So what about using the Main Street station? In that rail plan, it shows all the trains through Richmond being diverted through the Main Street station. Right now, the only trains that use Main Street station, that iconic station that you see when you go through Richmond, are the 2 Peninsula trains and there's a 1 train that originates in Richmond. And those are the only 3 trains of about 20 trains a day through Richmond that use the Main Street station, and more importantly, that access downtown Richmond. So if you see the map on the right, you see this red line, which is an existing rail line, but it needs improvement to carry passenger trains. So right now, the Norfolk trains and most of the trains are using the black line, and that's why they miss downtown and Main Street. And then the Peninsula trains are using the orange line. So I couldn't find any funding in the plan to improve that line. So again, I assume that for the foreseeable future, that only the Peninsula trains will use the Main Street station. And so we tried to come up with something that would improve service and take into account that the unlikelihood of the Norfolk trains accessing downtown, and the unlikelihood of improving travel times within Richmond. And so we looked at, well, what are our transportation partners? Where do people come and go from Hampton Roads? You may remember this from the Gateway study we did. You can see Hampton Roads there in white, and you can see the big blob of dots around the Richmond region. And so not surprisingly, it's our closest, biggest metro. It's the state capital, and that's where that's our biggest transportation partner, Richmond. So we came up with a proposal, an idea really more than a proposal, to what we're calling the RVA 757 connector, which would be a train running back and forth between Newport News and Richmond. So being a shorter distance, it could make 8 runs a day from end to end, 4 eastbound and 4 westbound. You should know that all the trains in Virginia, well, the Virginia trains, that is, they all go to either New York or to Boston. So that's the Roanoke trains, that's the Norfolk trains, that's the Richmond train, and the Newport News train. They all do that run. This, on the other hand, and so in other words, they only make like one run a day, I guess. Takes that length of time to get it from end to end. Whereas this, being shorter, you could run back and forth with 1 train set. So you're not paying for additional trains. You're just using 1 train, and you're getting sort of the equivalent of 4 trains for 1 train. Now, of course, it's only getting you to Richmond, but at Staples Mill, you can transfer to about 16 different trains, I think, that are running up and down that corridor. So this proposal would include a new station at Providence Forge, and then it would serve your typical Amtrak purposes, which are visits, business, and vacation. tends to be a lot of personal trips on Amtrak as opposed to work trips. But due to the shorter distance, you could add to that commuting, shopping, even dining. So, and then due to the frequency, like I said, many more connections at Staples Mill. Right now, you can transfer at Staples Mill, but let me see a show of hands. How many people have ridden a train from either Norfolk, Williamsburg, or Newport News? Okay, a lot of hands. How many of those? Keep your hands up if you have ridden that train to a location in the southern United States. Okay, all the hands down, because it's very difficult to, you might be sitting for 6 hours in Petersburg or Richmond waiting for that train to come through. So with these more frequent trains, you got a better chance of connecting, and I'm going to show you that on the slide after this. I'm going to show you those connections. So first, I'm showing you some travel times, and you've got 15 to 110-minute travel times between these 5 stations: Newport News, Williamsburg, Providence Forge, Richmond Main Street, and Richmond Staples Mill. That's what those abbreviations stand for. They use these 3-letter things, sort of like you do for airports. Then I've just, for the heck of it, sort of come up with an example schedule to show you what you could do with 8 runs, starting at 6 a.m., ending at 10 p.m. So that's like 2 8-hour shifts for your staff or staffing the train. And you can see, running the first one, for example, running from Newport News to Williamsburg to Providence Forge to Main Street, and then on to, even though it takes another half an hour, on to Staples Mill, so that you could get those connections, north and south, both north and south. Okay. So here are the connections I was talking about. These are new connections that you could make. So you don't have to read all this, but just notice that you're connecting to Charleston, Savannah, Washington, Raleigh, of course, the Northeast Corridor, Philadelphia, New York, but also Orlando, Tampa, Florida, Jacksonville. So coming and going, people coming here and us going there. Okay. So just mention quickly commuting. It's not ideal because it's not like a VRE train where maybe you have a train every 30 minutes or an hour or whatever. But there are some travel time pairs that you could, not travel time pairs, but scheduling pairs that you could use, also including the existing trains. And there's some, I just show in the first group there some of the shorter times that people could do every day, and then some of the longer times that you could do if you're a hybrid worker like a lot of people these days. And so I just want to summarize to say that we processed a year's worth of GPS. I don't know, but I'm guessing we're the first in Virginia to do this. And we found some delays, like I said, in Chesapeake and Norfolk, in Henrico County, and then particularly between the 2 stations in Richmond. But then the sad truth of the burying ground there, or the least of which being that these improvements can't be made, but that's the reality. And so just move on to say that these 3 trains to Norfolk does not seem certain to me at all, because the timetable is not nailed down in the long range plan, and you won't be able to get downtown from Norfolk for the foreseeable future. So we're just throwing out this idea for the RVR 757 connector, and we're going to discuss that with not only DRPT, but VPRA and the Richmond people and Petersburg people actually on Monday. So less than a week from today. And so that's the good news. Also, this report will be available like Keith's, but I forgot to put a slide. And Pavithra didn't catch it when she looked over the slides. Wow. Okay, it's not even 11 o'clock yet. Right. Thank you very much.
So that's all of our presentations for the day. Moving on to item 13 is the 3-month tentative schedule, which you'll find in your agenda package. You'll also find items for your information.
Just want to call everyone's attention to the for your information. We do have an active public survey for the 2050 LRTP to help us do our scenarios for the 2050 plan. So if you could share that survey with your different areas, we'd much appreciate it. We want to make sure that we get a lot of good, diverse input to help us develop those scenarios for the plan. So thank you.
Item 15 is announcements, and I would note in particular, John wants to address item E.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I wanted to address a couple items.
Go right ahead.
Bonus. So under item B, we are having a traffic subcommittee meeting over in the 757 room as soon as we're done here. And even if you are not on the subcommittee, you can still attend. We are looking to fill some vacancies. So if it's something you're interested in, you're absolutely welcome. There's plenty of room and there might be food there too. So anyway, also under E, recently the Transportation Programming Subcommittee met June 16th and discussed the carbon reduction program funding. The funding for fiscal year 22 and 23 has been recommended for allocation, and what we're looking at is a process by which we're going to allocate the monies moving forward in fiscal year 24 to 29. And so I got the idea to form a working group there was a lot of discussion at our last TPS meeting, and so I wanted to form a working group so we could get into a little more detail and to bring some recommendations to the TPS in September. So if you are willing to serve on this working group between now and September, I'm looking for 3 to 5 volunteers. If you want to volunteer right now, I would be more than happy to take your name down. All right, one already see that? All right, now that 2, okay, we got it. At least one more for now, and I will send a follow-up email to see if I can get some more folks interested. And we do want to start meeting pretty soon so we can get those recommendations ready for September. So one more at least, and then we can call it a day. If not, I'll try to reach out and coax you in other ways. Anyway, but yeah, just if you are interested, I'll follow up with an email, and you just shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll get the first meeting scheduled. So thanks for those of you who have volunteered already. That's it.
Were there any other announcements? And there's no additional old or new business listed in the agenda. But with that, we're adjourned.